Let's just look at a few of the ones that, let's call them constraints, things that you should not do. For example, processed food. I don't know, a hamburger. How do we look at the things that we shouldn't do? Alcohol. Obviously, cigarettes is an obvious one, but alcohol, let's see, and I'm not saying being an alcoholic. I'm just saying, 3 beers on a Saturday night at the footy or 6 beers on a Sunday afternoon. What are the constraint things? What are some of the constraints, hacks that we should be looking at? And I just gave some examples, but maybe you could open that up a little bit for me.
A really good way is, start understanding how to read food labels. And by understanding how to read a food label, you don't need to know what polysorbate 80 is and monosodium glutamate is. All you need to do is pick up anything in the grocery store and spin it around and read the label and just ask yourself, do I know where to find this in this grocery store? So if it says rice, yep, I know where I can find that. If it says cane sugar, yep, I can find that. If it says polysorbate 80, what aisle is that in? If it says high fructose corn syrup, where would I find that? If it says red dye number 40, red dye 30, artificial flavor, it's not located anywhere in that grocery store because it's not a consumable. It's not an ingredient. It is a chemical. So that's the fastest way to get to learn to read food labels is if you read something on the back of a label that you wouldn't be able to walk around the grocery store and find, and you don't recognize where I could get it. When it says onion powder, I could probably go find that. So that's a very easy way to begin to read food labels and start to get yourself towards a whole food diet, shopping the perimeter of the grocery store, being cautious about the aisles. That's the first, place to start. You don't need to become a citizen scientist and be able to read every chemical or synthetic, that's on a label. The second thing is, this is why, you don't need to really count calories and count macros. Our ancestors didn't know calories and fat grams and the blue zones, you won't find a single centenarian that could tell you how many carbohydrates they had that day or how many grams of protein or how much saturated fat versus trans fat. What they did was they ate till they were satiated because we actually, we have this whole revolution of GLP-1s, Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro. All a GLP-1 is a hormone that you make in your gut. Glucose-like polypeptide is a hormone we make in our gut. And how do we make it? We make it in response to satiation. How do we get satiated? We eat nutrient-dense foods. If I put 4 boxes of Oreo cookies in front of you, you could chew your way through all 4 of those boxes. If I put 6 avocados in front of you, I promise you could not eat 6 avocados because the nutrient density is so high that your satiation response would be so strong you would start to feel sick if you kept eating.
So my stomach tells me.
Yeah. Your stomach kills you?
My stomach, what you're saying is my stomach will tell me by saying, Mark, you've had
Yeah.
enough.
It would just be, you will be so satiated, your gag reflex will kick in, right? And this is how human beings were meant to eat, not count macros and micros and try to figure out if something is gluten-free and non-GMO and vegan and vegetarian and dairy-free. We were meant to eat whole foods. And so the other thing that I would do is I would draw intention to your sleep. All right. And I'm going to teach this when I come to Australia in 3 weeks, but I would actually bring attention to your sleep. Sleep, I would argue, is the most bullied thing in our schedule. It's like the stepchild of our day, right? If you ask most people, when do you go to sleep? They'll say, when, I'm done getting all my stuff done, when I'm done my work or done with the kids or done with this or that. Well, what's your morning routine? They'll tell you what that is. What's your exercise routine? They'll tell you what that is. What's your routine at work? They'll tell you what that is. But if you say, what's your sleep routine? No idea, right? I don't have a routine to go to sleep. As soon as I hear somebody say that, that's the first thing I fix. Because by drawing attention to your human superpower, which is sleep, you can completely change the trajectory of your life, right? Why? I mean, why is sleep so important? I mean, a lot of people, we know that sleep is important, but we don't know why, right? I mean, in the body, we have a system that drains poisons and toxins and gets them out of the body. It's called the lymphatic system. It's a static system. It does not have the pressure of the heart behind it. It moves fluid by mobility, which is why things like Tai Chi, walking are amazing for you. And because it moves the lymph and it gets the waste out of your body. But there's another system in the brain called the glymphatic system. And the glymphatic system is the waste elimination system for the brain. It's the only way that the brain repairs, detoxifies, eliminates waste, divides, regenerates. And this system is active during deep sleep. So if you're not getting deep sleep, you're not getting toxicity out of the brain, which causes inflammation. If you're not getting REM sleep, you are not assembling conscious thought into memory. We learn things during the day, which stays here, and then we store them at night, which goes back here. And so into the what's called the hypothalamus from the prefrontal cortex. So when we get good sleep, we assemble strong memory. We have a learning capacity. When we get deep sleep, we actually eliminate waste and detoxify our brain, which is why you feel so amazing after you get 7 or 8 hours of really good sleep. Brain fog is another name for neural inflammation, right? So people walk around with brain fog all the time, not realizing how easy it is to fix.
So can I just get on to talk about this, because that's a big issue for me, or one that I've been concentrating on. I think what you're sort of saying, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what you're saying is you actually need to have a strategy around how you're going to go to sleep at night and how well you sleep for the night, and you also probably need to measure it. Because when you show me your screen there from your 8 sleep, I didn't quite get a chance to look at it, but how many hours would you say of an 8-hour period? I don't want to know percentages, but are we talking about like in aggregate every night you're trying to get out of if you've got a really good sleep efficiency, are you trying to get like 3 hours of both REM and deep sleep in that 8-hour period? What are we talking about here?
So I got, last night was 100% sleep score. I got 7 hours and 28 minutes of sleep.
Yep.
My deep sleep was 1 hour and 32 minutes. My REM sleep was 1 hour and 35 minutes.
So about 3 hours altogether.
Yeah. 3 hours total.
Yeah. So because you need to be able to measure these things. I mean, it's good to have a strategy, but if you need to be able to somehow measure it so you can sort of know exactly how you are performing.
Or a Ring, a Whoop, an 8 sleep mattress. Yep. Those are all great ways to do it. I mean, what you can track when measure, you can fix. What you will see, if you brought up alcohol, is 100% of the time that you drink before bed, it interrupts your sleep score.
One drink and 2 drinks? What are we talking about? Any amount?
About 2 ounces of alcohol within 2 hours of bedtime. And that's for a number of reasons, because it's not the alcohol. It's what the alcohol becomes. Alcohol gets converted into something by the liver called acetaldehyde. And acetaldehyde is not only a poison, your body can handle it, but it's a poison. But it also drops the pH of the blood. The pH range of your blood is very narrow. It's about 0.5 point. We know that as you move towards the alkaline end of the spectrum, you are in a disease-free state. As you move towards the acidic end of the spectrum, you're in a disease-prone state. Does that mean every time you're acidic, you're diseased? No. It doesn't mean every time you're alkaline, you're healthy. But the point is that the more that we can stay towards the upper end of that scale, the healthier we are, the better our body functions, the less inflammation, the less oxidative stress we're under, the less free radical damage going on. And so when you drink and it converts into acetaldehyde drops the pH of the blood, makes you more acidic, and is a poison that your liver and other organs in your body, your brain, have to process. And so alcohol also converts to sugar while we sleep. So people have a couple glasses of wine to go to sleep because it's first will make you sleepy, but then it starts to wake you up. Why? Because as you process the alcohol, your blood sugar starts to rise. So it's almost like having a candy bar in your sleep. And so now your glucose is rising, which puts you in a awakened state. Your pH of your blood is falling, which makes you foggy and irritable and gives you a headache. So, at least during the weekdays, prioritizing your sleep and actually just drawing attention to it. A lot of times you'll find that if you really examined your day, you're doing a bunch of nonsense in the 60 to 90 minutes leading up to sleep. You're scrolling through Instagram, you're You're watching a show that you really don't even need to watch. You're just sort of barely entertaining yourself. And you could be donating that time to your temple. I really feel like we should look at our bodies as a temple. And we should say, I'm only going to let things in that serve me. I'm not going to let thieves into the temple. I don't care how pretty a suit you have on. And I'm going to do things that are in service to my temple. I'm going to put clean water, clean air, clean food. I'm going to treat it well. I'm going to build this sort of imaginary fence around myself, and I'm going to buffer things that are trying to get into the temple, which includes a lot of relationships that we have. And just adopting this mentality and not changing your whole life overnight will set you on a trajectory to be the most ultimate human version of yourself.
Where's the middle ground here?
I think what I do with people as a starting point, and MB, you were cutting weight. So say I had a client the other week, very successful physiotherapist, very, very smart guy, basically said, look, man, I need to lose some weight. Write me a diet plan. I went, okay, look, I respect you, so I'm going to go through this with you properly.
Scientifically.
And I said, that's 2 steps ahead though. Me writing you a diet plan, it doesn't matter. I can write you the perfect diet plan, but if you don't understand the meaning behind the words on that plan, why you're doing it, why you're having the porridge, why you're putting the bananas, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't work like that in any other facet of your life. It's not going to work in nutrition. So let's take it 2 steps back. And what I got him to do, I said, man, just for 1 week, download MyFitnessPal. And I'm not all for tracking MyFitnessPal. It's a tracking app where you just track every calorie, and that can cause a lot of mental drama, but it's important. It's important for you to understand what's happening in my food environment right now. So we know what we're working with.
Back to measurement.
If we can measure it, we can manage it. So, and what I need you to see is what's going on, and I need you to see it. So what we got him to do, hey man, don't change anything. I'm not going to judge you. I do this with thousands of people. Just write it down, put it in this app, send me it, and we'll go through it. And he pretty much texted me after a few days. He went, oh my God, I know what you mean. He goes, I'm eating so much more. And he goes, it's crazy how this just adds up, these little snacks. And he goes, you know what, always tell me eat more protein. I thought I was eating protein, but I was never measuring it, and I'm not getting nearly as much. And what I'm doing is I'm actually snacking on the bread and everything else
Kit
when
Kats
I'm hungry. And Kit Kats, yeah. And it's, I used to think I'm getting the small ones, so it doesn't matter. But when you're having 10 of them, geez, that adds up with calories. Or when I'm putting the oil in the pan when I'm cooking my eggs in the morning, geez, that adds up with a lot of calories. You just become a lot more aware of it. And I think that's the most important thing, because I can write you a diet, but if it's not foods that you're used to eating, it's not foods your family eats, it's not things that are familiar with you, that's in your environment, it doesn't matter. You might stick to it for 8 weeks. You're not going to do it for 8 years. And so getting people to understand, okay, what are you actually doing? And then for this person, we go through and I go, where do you think the issues are? And the thing is with this nutrition, there's a lot of science to it. It can be very complicated. You can get very in the weeds. Most people have a pretty good idea. Most people will probably be able to tell you, I know protein's pretty good for me. Protein equals muscle, pretty good. As we get older, we want to keep as much muscle as possible. Probably need to have a high amount of protein. Carbs, we know. Like carbs, yeah, we go love-hate relationship with them. Do you want them? Do you not want them? If you're going to be doing some type of activity, it's probably a good idea to have them. I always say for carbs, I'm a big advocate. If you're going to eat carbs, use them as the vessel to get your fiber. That's the one thing I say to people.
How do you mean as your fiber?
As your fiber. So like if you're getting brown rice, brown bread, you're getting all this really good carbohydrate source, complex carbohydrates, we call them the starchy carbs, the grainy carbs. They're going to have fiber in there. And fiber is probably the one nutrient that we know, hey, if you have 30 grams plus for a guy, 30 to 40 grams per day over your lifetime, you're going to have pretty good health outcomes. So even if you don't like carbohydrates, I compromise with people and go, hey, all you need to do is eat enough of them to get 30 grams of fiber per day. And then we move down to the fat and we go, okay, well, fat's important. We know we can put numbers on there and go, okay, you still need fat for that hormonal health, everything else that it does. You need to be getting it, brain health, everything. So we can appreciate that there's some importance. And then all we need to do once we're looking at this data from the MyFitnessPal, I can say, okay, MB, you can appreciate not enough protein, not having enough fiber, and then your fat's probably too high because we're having all these other different sources. We're having, too much ice cream or whatever and bagels and blah, blah, blah. So we get too much refined sugars that's not giving us fiber, too much fat, not enough protein. So how do we fix that? And then I just say basic numbers. And I think that's what people want. They want basic numbers. I go, okay, we want to aim for protein, aim for 2 to 2.5 grams per kilogram per day.
So in my case, that's 180 grams a day.
Yeah, 180 grams.
That's a lot of protein, mate.
And then, you look at it and you go, okay, well, if we come back to your RMR, and let's say 2100, if we go, okay, if there's only 200 grams, if you work out the calories, that's only 800 calories worth of protein from you.
Is that right?
So 800 calories from your daily protein, just short.
Yeah.
If we're getting 200 grams of protein. So it's not much.
But to get 200 grams of protein, I worked out I have to eat like 800 grams of steak.
Yeah.
Or that's like 400 gram steaks. Fuck, that's a lot of steak.
Yeah.
I mean, for me.
Yeah.
Because as we get older, it's for some reason, I don't know what the deal is. It seems to be harder to eat as much as I could when I was younger. I don't know what it is. My appetite's not the same.
Absolutely a thing. Yeah.
Maybe my hormonal system's changing and it doesn't make me as hungry or something. I don't know what the deal is.
Yeah, and that's where you can use things like supplements. That's why they're there. So
can we talk about that?
Yeah, so let's use a supplement. Okay, we've identified, Mark, you're struggling to get the protein in. Hey, I'm pretty confident you need to get 2 grams in. So let's just settle on that. Okay, Geordie, I don't want to eat this many steaks as chicken. Okay, well, let's use these supplements then that are there to supplement your diet. Ideally, we're getting whole foods. Yeah, we can all agree. And I'm a big fan, 90-10 rule. I go 90-10. 90% of the time, get it from whole foods.
Get your protein and your fats and your carbs
I
from
say
whole food.
90% of your calories should be from whole foods. 10% be from
supplements.
Well, less favorable foods, I guess. And you might be able to include supplements in there.
Right.
So more processed foods, I would say. And I say 90-10, people go, that's very strict. I go, yeah, you say 90-10, but then people slide down and then it really ends up being about 80-20. And I used to say 80-20 to people, but then people slide and it ends up being 60-40. So 90-10
is
a good
80-20, so George, just so I can understand this. So you're saying if I need 180 grams of protein a day, or let's call it 200 just to make the math easy, I should be getting 160 of those grams of 160 grams of that 200 grams of protein from normal food.
If
that's
possible.
80%, and 40 maybe, which is maybe one or two protein drinks.
Yeah, if possible.
If possible, yeah.
If possible. Ideally, like in an ideal world, we get it all from whole foods and you don't feel upset in your stomach and you can eat this many steaks, but it's not possible, right? It's not in the realm of reality. That's why you go, okay.
Especially if you're working and stuff.
Especially if you're a busy guy. Yeah. You're a busy guy, you got a life. Like, I don't have a chef at home 24/7. I got to look after the kids. I got to do this. I got to run the businesses. I got to do it. So sometimes, it's a lot easier for me to grab the protein shake than to sit down and cook a medium rare, well-seasoned steak. Yeah. So it's like, let's use the supplements there. So that's what I would say. 2 to 2.5 grams per kilo of protein. I would come down to the carbs and I would say, okay, generally I'd say between 3 to 5 grams per kilogram of your body weight. But within that, make sure you're eating enough complex carbohydrates to get about 30 grams of fiber per day.
Complex being sweet potato or potato.
Quinoa, brown rice, brown bread, the more complex ones that have got the good stuff in there, multigrain bread, things like that, seeds. So you can go through that and then, then we go down to fat. And then we go, because we can work that out then and go, okay, Mark, we're getting 800 calories from the protein. Let's say we're having 400, I don't know, let's say 4 grams per kilo. Let's say we're having 300 grams of carbs. So that's going to work out. We're going to have 4, 8, 12, 1,200. So we've got a little bit of
room to move.
We've got a little bit of room. Whatever's left there, we need to put that into your fat.
Yeah.
And so usually that'll work out anywhere from 1 gram, maybe up to 1.5, maybe up to 2 grams per kilogram body weight of fat.
And what are we talking about here? Olive oil, nuts?
Yeah, we're looking at those healthy fats. Like I think in fats, you can get really in the weeds. Don't get me wrong. Like there's a whole science of different types of fats and that gets very complicated. But again, you bring this back to basics. If I show you 2 fats, if I show you a cheeseburger and some olive oil, you can tell me which one's healthy. If I show you some salmon and I show you deep fried, you can tell me which one's healthier. Yeah. So if we can look again, apply that rule 90% of the time, let's try and get these healthy fats over here. And then 10%, maybe we need to stop at a server and we need to get this because we're just running around between work. Maybe we've got to do that. But 90% of the time, let's try to do it. But that just gives you a structure there where, okay, protein, 2 grams per kilogram, say carbs, anywhere 3 to 4 grams, but making sure we're getting the 30 grams of fiber. And then for fat, anywhere between 1 gram all the way up to 2 grams per kilogram. At least that gives you some structure. So when you're looking at that app, coming back to tracking it, you've got something to measure against. And like we keep saying, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So let's have a look at where your diet is now. Let's work out these numbers and you go, oh, Geordie, I'm actually eating way too many carbohydrates. And it's not necessarily that carbs are bad, but my protein intake's suffering because of it. Okay, so instead of you going and getting a donut or a croissant, why don't we swap that for some jerky or some other high protein sources? So it gives you some type of structure that then we can measure up against and go, where am I at? And that's the most important step. And that all happens before I come in and write a diet. But once we get to this point and we go, okay, what's your food environment, MB? Where are your numbers at compared to where I think you should be at? Now we can start talking about your diet. Now we can start talking about swaps you can make. Now we can figure out where you're struggling. Oh, I struggle to eat lunchtime because I'm busy. I'm in the office. I've only got access to the cafe downstairs. Okay, well, what are the better options at the cafe? What can we eat at the cafe that better align with these numbers that we've now said? And at the end of all of that, what's your goal with your calories? Do you want to maintain? Do you just want to feel good? Are you trying to lose a bit of weight? Are you trying to put on muscle? That's when we can extend that out to your calories. Where do we want to land at the end of the day with your calories based on whatever your goal is? I want to maintain. I want to lose weight. I want to put on muscle.
So you just talked about something very interesting there about jerky. So I often hear people say to me, keto diet, carnivore diet, and vegan also. We'll just look at vegan in a second, but those first two are sort of somewhat related. Is the keto - carnivore diet, well, keto is slightly different carnivore, but like carnivore, that's just carnivore. It's a bit more extreme. Just meat. Okay. Nothing else. No fruit, no vegetables. They just eat meat. What's the general popular opinion of your industry about the carnivore diet?
Carnivore is interesting because it kind of really got popular within the combat sports community for a while. And again, like there's no long-term studies, right? We don't know if someone, let's get a group of babies, then pop out and let's feed one of them carnivore, one of them Mediterranean. We don't have that data. So conclusively, maybe where I'm sitting, I look at that and I go, oh, when that was really popular, I consulted with a lot of clients that had really high cholesterol, total cholesterol, and really high LDL cholesterol. And when I looked into what they're doing with their diet, they were all following carnivore. And they were eating 8 steaks a day.
Yeah.
They were eating eggs. And they're going, it's not necessarily steak and eggs is bad. But again, if we come back to that structure and we go, okay, let's just say these are the rules that we think work. The good protein, use your carbs to get the fiber, and then let's have the healthy fats. If we're using those rules, where are we getting the fiber from? Where are we getting, you're getting the protein, but you're getting a lot of fat here. Heart disease is a real thing. That's something we definitely dealt with very high level athletes too. I think I probably pulled 15, 20 high level athletes off of a carnivore diet. And then because of their blood work, and this is the other thing, I guess we come back to the start.
In terms of measurement, we didn't do bloods.
In terms of measurement, when we're looking at bloods, that's an important piece because you can have the body composition. And I might be saying, hey, Mark, for you, 12 to 14% is very healthy, but you being at 12% body fat, your blood markers might be terrible. So that says to me as the practitioner, hey, we've got to readjust something. You're either having too little calories, too many. Okay, I'm looking at this. If I'm seeing your cholesterol's through the roof, the first thing I'm looking at is your fat intake. Let's see how we can adjust. And that was something we saw a lot in practice with this carnivore diet, is that we just had ongoing clients with high cholesterol and high LDL cholesterol. And funny enough, when we took them off the carnivore diet, put them back in that structure, hey, let's get some more different sources of fats, those more healthy fats, the more Mediterranean, I guess we'd call fats, get more fiber in their diet, and then periodize their carbs around training, you'd see those bloods correct. But it's just because it's popular opinion, right? And they go, hey, I'll just watch this guy on Instagram. He said it was the best. And it's like and a lot of these guys, this is the other funny point to it, they look good.
Yeah.
They looked really good. Like these guys were shredded. And so from the outside, if we're just using the DEXA as our measurement,
looks great.
We're going, man, you look pretty good.
But the other measurement should be bloods.
Yeah. And even in the gym, they're performing okay. Like they put in the carbs in around the training. They were doing okay. But then you look at the blood and you go, man, like you're a 25-year-old kid, you're 30. I know right now you don't care. But in 10, 15, 20 years, you will care. Like you need to change this. That's not a good panel to have when you're 25, 30 years old.
What about ketone? What's the difference between that and carnivore?
I think keto is a lot more, I think the carnivore guys is from what I understand of it at least, is you're just eating meat, right? You're just eating meat. Whereas like keto, I think of, what is it? Bulletproof coffee. I remember being at a cafe.
I remember that.
Yeah. And someone ordering, I literally remember someone ordered a black coffee and they put a stick of butter in there.
And then some MCT oil.
Yeah. That's the one. And I just remember sitting there and they go, do you want one? I went, no, God, no. I do not want one of them. Yeah. I was like, that's like 600 calories just sitting there. And this is the other thing that, like the keto works. Every diet can work if you follow those rules. And I think vegan is the best example of this, which we'll talk about. you can be a very healthy vegan and you can be a very unhealthy vegan. Like if you're sitting there telling me you're eating brownies, ice cream, chocolates, and that's all you're eating in your diet, but they're all vegan, that's not healthy. That to me is not healthy.
So would you be able to explain why exercise is so important in the whole longevity game? And now when I say longevity, I'm talking about living to our optimized length of period at our optimizing our general health during that period. That's what I mean by longevity, optimization.
Sure.
What?
When you think, oh, go ahead.
No, I know. Where's exercise fit into that? How does it enhance it and make it better?
Yeah. So when you want to think about longevity, and I appreciate you acknowledging the fact that people use different terms. And so you qualified what you mean by it. Most of us are going to say something like this. There's going to be your lifespan. How many years you're going to live? Okay, great. And then some amount of years within that, we'll call that your wellness span. Again, different phrases here, but just, you live and you live well. We all want to live for a long time, but mostly we want to live as well as we can for whatever years that we have. Okay, great. Well, just below that is something we call the strength span. So your strength span is going to determine your wellness span, and it will determine your lifespan in large part, but it has a really strong tie to your wellness span. Here's what I mean. As soon as you get below a certain level of physical strength, you can no longer presume activities of daily living. You can't shower. You can't clean up for yourself. You can't be confident to walk across the street. And because of that, your physical activity plummets. You don't walk, you don't do much, you sit more, you don't stand as much, you don't engage in social activities. You don't go to that party in the park for your grandchild's birthday party because, it's too far from the road and you hate that thing and it's way over there. And it's rainy outside and you're concerned about you're going to slip down. So you see this huge withdrawal from social activity. That then causes psychological concerns because you have less a sense of purpose. You have a larger sense of burden, and you're not engaging in the upcoming and new world. You start withdrawing, and then things start changing around you really fast, and it gets way too out of control at such an alarming rate. And so you just kind of stop wherever you're at and live in that exact spot for as many years as you can, which is really, really hard thing to do. So your strength, specifically in your legs, will determine your interface with the world. It is the way you locomote. It is the way you get around. If your legs become just slightly below a particular threshold, not only will we have a whole consequence of physiological problems, but then we have all those other things I just laid out. Again, lack of physical activity, which leads to lack of a social engagement, lack of sense of purpose, so on and so forth. Those things, if you look at all the research, are the largest determinants of all-cause mortality. And so there's another way to say that is, if I were to put you through every single test in the world, let's say you're one of our health optimizer clients that we have. You're worth billions of dollars, and I work with plenty of these people. There's not a single test you could pay for that will tell you more about your likelihood of surviving than something like a leg strength test or a VO2 max test. There's no blood test. There's nothing else in the world that will outpredict physical performance for longevity and all-cause mortality. So that alone should tell you, hey, it's not the only thing that matters. And I don't need you to be a world champion or be some crazy exerciser training 6 hours a day or even 2 hours a day every day. None of those things are what I'm saying. What we're mostly saying is don't be in the bottom 20th percentile. Don't be the lowest fit person you know. Don't be the weakest person you know. Don't have the worst sleep that you know. Don't have the most joint pain or back issues. If you have those things, your chances of dying relative to the person next to you are somewhere between double to 4 to 5 times as high, depending on the metric we're looking at, the study design, your age, and like all those factors, right? It is a marked increase in all-cause mortality risk. If you look at things like your VO2 max, this is your cardiovascular endurance, your aerobic capacity, right? This is the higher heart rate type of stuff. You'll see similar numbers there that you saw with leg strength and for physical grip strength, right? Your forearm and hand strength. You'll start seeing things like 20, 30, 40, 50% increases in risk of dying when you have moderate to low cardiovascular fitness. If you compare that to something like smoking, you're probably double or triple the risk with low fitness than you are with cigarette smoking.
Wow.
And cigarette smoking is awful for you, right?
Wow.
You can stack them up. You can stack blood pressure. You could stack cholesterol levels. You could stack smoking. You could stack renal disease. And if you look at those things predicted to low physical fitness will not only outpredict them, it's typically 2 to 3-fold, if not higher, the predictive power than any of those other markers. So this is why when people like us are harping on it, there's a lot of reasons to think that. It is by far, and not a small amount, it is orders of magnitude sometimes more important than any of those traditional clinical risk factors or measures.
So if somebody comes into your studio, your clinic, or your surgeries, or whatever you run, particularly out there in Texas, what do you do to work out? Let's say someone from 60 to 70 in that age. Just pick an age group, one cohort. What is a leg strength test? What the hell is that? Like, what are you trying to do? See if I can do a deadlift? What are you trying to work out?
There's no one particular test you can or can't do. What you want to do is look for global ideas. Again, I'm not trying to make sure you're the 80th percentile or 85th percentile. What I mean by that is, if you're in a room of 100 people your age, I don't need to make sure that you're the top 10 strongest girl in the room. I don't care about that, right? I want to look and make sure you're not the bottom 10.
Right.
That's really what we're after. And I say that to say, so the specifics of the test don't matter that much, because we're not trying to differentiate the 99th place versus the 92nd place. I'm trying to differentiate horrific versus, okay, you're fine. So this could be a leg press. Find a leg press machine. It could be a leg extension machine. If you want to do a front squat, great. You want to do a barbell squat? Awesome. I don't really care, because we have normative values on all those things. So do whatever test you feel comfortable with. Do it well, get a good quality number, and then just Google search what's a normal score for my age, my sex, based on this exact thing, and you'll get in the ballpark. And if you think you're like kind of low-ish, then you need to make some serious changes. If you're really, really high, then you're okay. Keep doing what you're doing. Anywhere in between, then we probably want to make progress.
Here are the big 5 chronic diseases in our community.
So I'm glad you told me as 5, because I've always thought it was. I've always read it as 4. I wouldn't know. I'm only learning, but you're going to tell me it's 5. That's great. I want to hear what these are.
I'll see which one's the extra one. Yeah. So number 1, cardiovascular disease.
Yeah, and it's number 1 killer in the world.
Number 1 killer in the
world.
By
a long shot.
By a big margin. It's a little bit better than it was in the 80s. We have made some gains there, partially because we're just much better at doing stuff, right? Yeah. So, I do research and work with a cardiologist at the Victorian Heart Hospital. Some of the stuff they do is amazing, but it's all reactive care, It's like taking out your appendix with one port. They can now thread things into your heart and put a stent in and clip the valves in your heart, just by threading a wire in. But we're better at doing stuff, but cardiovascular disease remains the number 1 killer.
So just on that then, if we could just, it's number 1 killer, but in terms of us getting better at dealing with it, you're just saying more from an engineering point of view, like in that instruments are better and there's more efficiency, less cutting up, less invasion, etc.
The reactive care component is better. The procedural component is better.
Yep.
But we have an aging population as well. More and more people have these diseases, but it's silent. And what we need to do is actually get in front of it. So like cardiovascular disease is number 1, right? Number 2 is metabolic disease. Metabolic disease is a big umbrella. So some people think metabolic disease, do you mean diabetes? Diabetes is under the umbrella of metabolic disease, but it's a huge umbrella. It's actually how your body functions, how you process sugars, how your hormones work, what your body composition is, what your inflammatory processes are. That's all metabolic health. And 2 out of 3 people in Australia actually are in a state of suboptimal metabolic health. So they don't have full-blown diabetes, but there is something in terms of their function that is interfering with their with optimal metabolic function.
And will that eventually kill them?
It's likely to eventually drive another process that could put them at risk of a sudden event or of early demise. So metabolic health is the biggest contributor to things like cardiovascular disease. It's the biggest contributor, probably outside of genetics or more so than genetics, contributing to things like neurodegenerative conditions, like Alzheimer's, like Parkinson's disease. It's all systems are just not functioning well. That's metabolic. So that's number 2.
And we're talking about in Australia now, like in terms of you're ranking these things, a cardiac arrest or a heart disease, metabolic disease, and the third one is going to be?
There's different ways to rank them, but like I'm talking more about the burden of disease. Right. Okay. So number 3 is musculoskeletal disease. I think this is something that is often overlooked.
I've never heard of that one. Well, what is that?
Musculoskeletal, your muscles and your bone.
Yeah.
How well is your physical body working? And for folks who want to really achieve longevity and to really achieve health span, so that's living your life in your 80s and 90s the way you're living in your 50s and 60s, right? I'm doing all the things that you want to do. One of the biggest blockers to that goal, to that reality, is usually musculoskeletal disease.
In other words, becoming frail.
Becoming frail. Frailty, right? We call it, if you have suboptimal muscle, we call that sarcopenia. So it's a medically defined condition now.
Is it a condition or is it a disease, sarcopenia? Like your muscles start to diminish. Is that a disease state or?
It's more of a condition. I mean, like, how do you separate a condition and a disease? So like, I think some folks would think a disease is an active process. An active process would be like if you had motor neuron disease, it's an active process where it's really like there's an active process that is diminishing your abilities.
Yeah.
Whereas sarcopenia is more so the gradual loss of function. But from my point of view, we really just want to look at the outcomes. Like we need to protect you from active processes, but we also need to protect you from normal time-based processes. The process is like quite similar and the outcome is quite similar, which is the outcome is very clear. We need to be goal-focused, which is strong bones as you age, strong muscles as you age, while taking into account the fact that it actually becomes harder to build muscle.
Because are you saying then, Stephen, that it's frailty, which being the end goal, but the musculoskeletal demise, whilst it's sort of inevitable as we age, you can slow down the inevitability.
Yeah,
if you know what I mean.
Absolutely. Look, there is a natural decline.
Yeah.
So I'll give an example. When you're 30, the cost for you to build on 100 grams of muscle is going to be much lower than the cost of you trying to build it when you're 50.
What would the cost be?
The cost would be the effort and the amount of raw protein that you need. So basically, like what is the, let's say all things accounted for, how much protein do you need to eat to build up 100 and work out to build up 100 grams of muscle versus when you're 30 versus you're 50. So that is a natural decline. But it's about understanding that. By the way, that's also different from person to person, right? So one key thing that people should always remember is no two people are the same. We have different genetics. We're all dealt a different hand at the start of life. And some people, you've probably met these people, right? They don't work out a lot, but they really put on muscle very easily.
Yeah.
And some folks, they're just at the gym like 6 days a week. Yeah, they're working really, really hard. They're doing all the right things, but something might be blocking them from success, right? So at Everlab, we try to find what those reversible things are, but some of it's also genetic. But that's also important to understand because people are different, right? So we have to play our hands differently if you want to win.
And what's that's 3. So what's the fourth one?
Fourth one's cancer. I think that's a no-brainer. 1 in 2 people will get a significant cancer by the age of 80.
Whoa.
That number is also going down.
Wait,
right?
How do you mean it's now 1 in 3 or it's becoming 1
that
point?
age is also going down.
Oh, right.
So like cancer's going up.
Right.
In fact, this is very alarming. More and more young people are getting cancer. So if you're age under 39, so if you're between the age, I think the age gap is the age group is 15 to 39. Solid organ tumors have gone up by 80%.
What?
In the past 30 years.
Whoa.
So these are very alarming statistics. So, I went through medical school 20 years ago. When I was in medical school, it was unheard of to have young folks get like bowel cancer. Now it's happens all the time.
I had a friend of mine's wife who's only 40, early 40s, had breast cancer and passed away.
Cancer is on the rise. bowel cancer is now the deadliest cancer for people between the ages of 25 and 44.
No.
In Australia.
I always thought of it as an older person's cancer.
So these are all like, Mark, these are cultural assumptions that we make. And I see a lot of these and I hear a lot of these. These are cultural assumptions that we make. I've got a bunch of these, right? But one of those is cancer's an old person's problem. Well, I just told you the stats and I see it in practice.
Wow.
Also, cancer's a tricky one because, we can try our best to predict it, and we can to a much larger extent than people think. We can use genetics, we use family history, we use biomarkers. But the good thing about cancer is it does have a weakness, which is like early detection, but you want to make good decisions based on what your risk is. And we know that the risk is becoming higher for some reason. I think one day we'll look back at 2025 the way today we look back and think about when we used to smoke all the time and say, hey, like that increased cancer rates by 100, like across 100 different cancers. I think there are certain factors that are happening now, but it is no longer it is no longer an older person's problem.
And the fifth one, because I want to go through each one of those in a moment. What's your fifth?
The fifth one is neurodegenerative disease.
Of course.
Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. Alzheimer's is projected to be, by I think 2040, the leading killer in Australia. Obviously, it depends how you define what you put on a death certificate as well. But if you think about the burden of disease and the burden of pain on our community with an aging population, it's a real concern.
Alzheimer's and I presume you're in neurodegenerative disease. You're including things like Parkinson's and everything
Parkinson's, motor neuron disease. Obviously, they're a little bit rarer, but a vascular dementia, frontotemporal dementias, Lewy body dementias, all under that same umbrella. But Alzheimer's by far.
So we've got these five. The five. I used to think of the four horsemen, the five horsemen now, and the one that has never really been mentioned to me before is skeletal muscular.
That's right, muscles and bones.
Muscles and bones.
But this is not a foreign thing to people, though.
No,
right? Osteoporosis.
Yeah, totally.
Osteoporosis.
Well, a number of people break their hips and fall over, and because they haven't got enough muscle to carry them is quite incredible. I've got friends, older friends, who that's happened to. They face plant and they could have got brain damage. They could have died.
Yeah.
They trip over something and their their fast twitch ability is not there, and they can't correct.
Exactly.
And largely sometimes it's something to do with not the negligence, but they're not paying attention either because they're older. They're sort of walking and they trip over something that you or I might see, or you would definitely see. But their ability to correct the position and not land flat on their face and perhaps crack their head open is diminished, and because then
that's a functional deficit. Deficit. Is that a disease? Is that a condition? Well, it's hard to categorize it, but without a doubt, it's a functional deterioration. So why don't they have that reaction time? Why don't they have that proprioception to feel the position of their joints? Why don't they have the strength? Why don't they have the reaction time to put their arms out? And some of these cases, the death certificate might say like bleed in the brain or traumatic brain injury. But if you think, why did this person even fall over? Right? It's often weakness. It's musculoskeletal.
Can I just talk something about? Could you talk about, more importantly, a topic I know nothing about or don't know very little about other than some observations, and the changes in a female during the menopause period, or probably more importantly, let's start with perimenopause. What does that mean, and what happens to a woman during this process?
Yeah, I'm saying, gosh,
I know it's a big topic.
It's a big topic. So. Because I can be so long-winded, I need to really be more succinct. I'm going to try and be more succinct, or else we'll be here for like 5 hours.
Well, let's talk about perimenopause first.
Perimenopause first. So starting with puberty, because we've got to kind of go back to puberty till we can come. We've got to start at the beginning before we can come to the end. Puberty starts when your brain sort of turns the ovaries on, and then every month you've got this for most women, every month or so, you've got this lovely cycle where you ovulate, and if you don't become pregnant, the egg dies, and you've got these kind of hormones which are released from your ovaries first of all, estrogen around ovulation, and then during the luteal phase, if the egg's not ovulated, you get this kind of rise and then fall of progesterone. And then that kind of happens every month. But those hormones are in conversation with your brain, because hormones are molecules that get released into the blood. They travel all around the body, they make their way into the brain, and they latch onto receptors on cells and have knock-on effects. And so the brain and the ovaries have been in conversation every month throughout your reproductive life, unless you were on the pill, in which you have higher levels of synthetic hormones and you flatline your natural hormones. And that's, a great source of contraception and has lots of actually positive impacts on the brain for some women, and other women may have negative impacts. We can talk about that later. Or you're pregnant, right? You don't have that same cycling. When your eggs start getting old, so it's the eggs, the ovaries that then drive the end of that conversation. Brain started it when sometime in your 40s for most women, very rarely for some women in their 30s, but typically in your sort of early, mid, late 40s, eggs start to get a bit old. That's why it's harder to get pregnant. And that conversation gets a little less reliable between the ovaries and the brain. And so 1 month, the ovaries may not release much estrogen, and the brain, the hypothalamus in the brain, is like waiting for that signal and is kind of going, I can't hear anything, like make more. And the ovaries go, okay. So the next month they might make way too much, and the brain's going, not that much. And the ovaries go, okay. So there's this kind of weird sort of roller coastering of hormones. It's very volatile. And for some women, that volatility could last for 2 months. Some women that could last for 2 years. It could last for varying amounts of time.
Would this be called perimenopause?
We would call this perimenopause. So that's the months and years leading up to the final menstrual period. And then we would say that a woman is in menopause when she hasn't had a period for 12 months.
Right.
So up until that point, you're in perimenopause, and then you're in menopause. So they're quite different physiological states. And one of the kind of the hallmarks of perimenopause is your periods get shorter and heavier, and then they start getting longer, and then they fade away altogether. But in that time, you've got this massive hormonal flux. It's not that the estrogen's just dribbling away. It's like sometimes it's really high and sometimes it's really low. And so it's quite chaotic.
And that's your ovaries responding to what the brain
signals. The message
signals.
from the brain.
And the brain's responding to the message from the...
So everything is as a feedback loop.
Yep.
So it's this conversation where they're shouting at each other and whispering, and they're all over the place. And then eventually it all stops, and then everything flatlines. This is all HRT aside. So what is happening is our body and our brain is responding to these changing levels of hormones. And not only is the brain saying, hey, to the ovaries, I can't hear you, too much, not enough, the brain is also responding to those changing levels. Now, what we understand most well is the role that the changing levels of ovarian hormones play in one of the most common symptoms, which is hot flashes or vasomotor symptoms. So hot flashes during the day when you get really, really hot and sweaty, or at night when you're asleep, and it's even worse because typically you're under your covers and then you're hot and sweaty.
What causes the heat?
So we know that in the brain there's the hypothalamus, which is the part of the brain that's, it's getting signals about hormone levels, but body temperature and, have you eaten, what's your blood pressure, what's your heart rate, etc. It's all those basic biological body functions. And there's like a thermostat in your hypothalamus with a top level and a bottom level. You've got one, I've got one, everyone's got one. For some reason, I'm not entirely sure why, in women, the levels of that thermostat can be tweaked by estrogen. And when the levels start kind of going all over the place, the neurons that are responsible for that don't function in the way that they should, and the thermostat kind of goes a bit narrower. The bottom can go up, so some women can get more susceptible to cold, and the top goes down. So normally what happens when your body temperature gets too hot and it hits the top level of the thermostat, and you and me and everyone of every age, then you behave in a way to cool down. Well, there's a physiological response. So when you're really hot, you start to flush. So your body's trying to dissipate heat through your skin. So you get red, your blood vessels dilate, and you also sweat because that helps that cooling process as the sweat evaporates. And then you might behave in a way where you start going, oh gosh, I'm a bit hot, I'll take my jacket off, whatever. And opposite when you're cold. But when you're going through perimenopause and that level is gone down, your body temperature doesn't need to rise very much before it hits that top level. And then your hypothalamus is like, whoa, panic stations, it's hot in here. We need to cool down quick. And it has this almost like a panicked response. So you get this massive like rapid heat dissipation and sweating. So women just suddenly get this big like kind of heat all through them, and you can feel it all the way down through your legs. It's because part of that's a sympathetic nervous system response, whereby your sympathetic nervous system is dilating your blood vessels, and it's also sending a signal to your adrenal glands and your kidneys to release adrenaline to facilitate that kind of process as well. So we know that that is set by estrogen, because with hormone replacement therapy or menopause hormone therapy, when you put it back in, the thermostat rises and you become, that sensitivity is gone.
So because you can reach up, is it because the hot temperature, like the top temperature?
Yeah, the top has gone back up. Goes back up.
So you've got
it kind of resets.
more range.
So you've got more range in which you can function normally, like how you would, or how a teenager would, or you do when you're, in your younger years. And we see that thermostat being tweaked, like particularly postpartum, and when you're breastfeeding, that thermostat is tweaked, and you get you can get really, really sweaty like when you're breastfeeding, because that thermostat is being tweaked. So we do know it's hormone sensitive.
When you say you're more hormone sensitive, because you've got much more estrogen in your system when you're breastfeeding, for example.
No, you've got less estrogen. You've come off the highs of estrogen that you had when you were pregnant, and it's gone down. You're almost kind of withdrawing from estrogen. So it's more so to do with when you've got the less estrogen. But through perimenopause, you've got this kind of roller coastering, so it's coming and going. So the system's not kind of getting to the point where it can reset yet, because it's going up and down and up and down. It's not like it's flatline. And typically then once estrogen levels flatline, then over time, and I don't know why it takes so long, in some women it can last for 7 years, this sort of vasomotor symptoms. It'd be nice if the brain reset a bit quicker, but for some reason it's not. Once the brain kind of weans off estrogen and gets used to its new state, then the thermostat doesn't require, it kind of resets without the estrogen. But what you can do is use estrogen in the meantime, or else you could have 7 years of, up to 7 years in some women of these vasomotor symptoms.
This is what you call HRT.
HRT, you're putting the hormones back in.
Maybe take it back a step and talk about what stress is actually doing in the body. So fundamentally, stress is there to help us survive. It's there to help us reach peak performance. When we're stressed, whether it's being stuck in traffic or having an argument or trying to complete a task, we're releasing all of these neurochemicals that are essentially preparing us to meet that challenge. It's going to be diverting blood from non-essential things like our
digestion.
Yes, digestion, taking away from digestion, taking away from your skin. So you can imagine if it's taking it away from those things, your skin will age faster. Your gut you might experience irritable bowel kind of symptoms as a result of that. So that's one thing. But it's taking energy to the organs and the brain structures that are going to help you thrive in that situation. So your airways will dilate. Signals will be sent to your muscles to make, the blood vessels in your muscles dilate, so more blood flow gets to there, so that way you can escape a situation. You'll get more blood flow to certain regions in the brain as well. So really all of this beautiful, beautifully linked pathway is there to help us thrive. But also there's a spin-off as well. So it will help you in the short term, but if you're constantly experiencing stress in the long term, well, there are going to be consequences to reduce blood flow to the gut and to the skin. You'll get wrinkles, your hair might fall out, and you might have those symptoms in your bowel and your gut, as I spoke about as well.
Can it cause things like, or is there any correlation or any studies that indicate correlation perhaps as opposed to causation? Things like strokes or other brain disorders?
So we do know that you have an increased risk of neurodegenerative diseases, and basically it causes your cells across your entire body to age faster. So it affects every cell in your body right down to the level of your genes.
Is it through, as in oxidation? Is it oxidative stress? What are we talking about?
No, our stress hormone cortisol literally will go into cells and affect even the nucleus of a cell.
Wow.
So it's a very powerful modulator of how our body functions. Now, when we think about stress, we often think about things like adrenaline, and that affects your body in the short term for a couple of minutes. It has a very short half-life, so it doesn't stay in your body for a long time. But cortisol hangs around for a couple of hours. And in fact, if you're really stressed, it'll hang around for a lot longer than that. So you can imagine if you're experiencing things throughout the course of the day that are causing you to be stressed, and it could be more obscure things or more things that we don't think about, like not being able to pay the bills, or you're caring for someone who's sick, that is going to be constantly triggering that stress response. And that has consequences for the long term. So in the short term, it's great, but in the long term, it will actually affect the way our brain cells connect, the way our brain cells function. And in fact, it causes some brain cells to die in certain regions of the brain. And that, of course, has drastic consequences on the way we behave.
So is it maybe you just explain something to me. So there's different types of stress, I guess. There's probably good stress and bad stress. And good stress can help us build adaptations. So maybe you could, I'm talking as a layman, of course, but maybe you could sort of narrow it down. How do you define a good stress versus bad stress? I mean, what's the difference?
Well, I guess there's the emotional component. So let's say you are exercising. That's a good stress for the body, right? It's going to be releasing all of these incredible factors that improve brain function, improve blood flow. It even releases things like brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is essentially like a fertilizer for the brain. So it really helps your brain to function optimally. But if you hate exercise, then you'll respond slightly differently. So if you enjoy exercise, you'll also release things like endorphins, which make you feel good. But if you don't like exercise, you won't release them, and therefore you'll have more of those negative responses as a result of that. And a really good study that kind of reflects what I'm trying to say here is they've done studies, for example, on rats. And the rats love running on a running wheel. They will just do it as much as they can. They love it. And the rats that are doing it of their own choice will have these changes in the brain. They'll have essentially positive effects on their physiology. But if you were to force a rat to run, it has the opposite effect. It's basically causing stress in a negative way. And that has consequences not just for how the rat behaves, but also for its metabolism, also for its risk of, ultimately risk of negative consequences. So really, it can be good and it can be bad. And the difference is really your perception of the stress.
So and that's a good thing to talk about, your perception of the stress. How do we, everyone has a different perception of themselves being stressed. Is that because of, some sort of DNA that we've inherited from our parents, or is it something we've developed as we're growing up as kids, like through a socialization of our families? Or and how do like if I'm trying to live to as long as I possibly can, and I know that certain things stress me out, like at work, for example, there are some things that I get really aggravated by. How do I know whether they're good stresses for me or bad stress? Because, like I could just stop work, go and become a farmer or go and play golf every day. And because I see those guys, I went to school with those guys, and those guys are, friends of mine, and they look terrible, and they don't look like they're going to live longer than me. That's just my view on it at the moment. They're probably happy. I think they think they're happy, but I also feel as though they're not challenging themselves enough. And I see Dr. David Sinclair say things like, in terms of exercise, we should stress ourselves, exercise stress, and push ourselves to a limit, and that's the only way you get proper adaptations as we get older.
Yes.
Maybe you could sort of dig into that a little bit for me, because I find it like completely confusing. Everyone's got a different view.
Mindset matters. So we were talking about this a little bit before we went on air, and it really comes down to your perception of it. And another example that I can give of how this works. So there's a really cool study done by Dr. Crum quite a long time ago now, and her lab were basically looking at how your body responds to stress depending on what you think about stress. So they had a group of managers, and they told some of the managers about the positive effects of stress, that yes, it's there to help you reach peak performance, and your airways opening up means more oxygen is getting into your lungs, and that oxygen is going to help, your body function, and getting more blood flow to your muscles means that you're going to perform better. And having that mindset of that it's a good thing ultimately meant that they released a little bit less cortisol, or just the right amount of cortisol to allow them to do well. But for the people who were taught beforehand about the negative effects of stress, which are true, but it's also about mindset, right? They were taught about those negative things and they responded very differently. So if you think about it, we have this sort of optimal level of cortisol in our body to function, in challenging situations. And if you have too much, you end up with anxiety and your performance actually goes down. And if you don't have enough, then you also have poor performance. And we see this in athletes who, let's say they're playing basketball and there's a really easy shot and you know that they can do it, but there's the crowd roaring behind them and there's so much pressure.
And you need to win.
Yes. And their cortisol actually goes above the range that it's meant to be. And as a result, their performance goes down and they miss the shot. So by changing their mindset and realizing that actually, no, this is good stress, it's helping us to reach peak performance, it means that they will perform better. And in this study with managers, the ones that actually knew that stress was a performance enhancing thing, not only released the right amount of cortisol, they did better, as opposed to the ones who perceived it as being a negative thing, they performed worse and didn't have the right amount of cortisol. It was either too much or too little.
So how would one titrate that though in themselves? I mean,
knowledge is power. So once you know that actually stress can enhance your performance, that changes everything. If you don't know that, you're going to view your sweaty palms and your racing heart as a negative thing. But if you remind yourself, actually, it's there to make me be the best version of myself, then you will perform better.
Say it's a long-term stress. For example, let me just think of something. It's not just on today's transaction. It's something you're building up towards. Maybe you're trying to get your PhD publications out, and you've got 5 chapters, and you're coming up to defend your PhD. And it's been going on now for months, and you haven't had enough publications in order to get the PhD awarded. I'm trying to think of something that might be relevant to you, and this anxiety - stress goes on for months. It's there when you go to bed. It's there when you wake up in the morning. It's not just a little thing that's occurred today. Mm-hmm. I'm not just taking a goal, but it's something that's just traveling with me for months. How do you deal with that sort of thing in terms of your perception of the stress?
Right. That's where it comes into play, where you use other techniques to reduce the effects of stress on your body. So maybe you can't change your mindset so much, but you can change how you respond to that stress. And that is where you might start to use certain tools to reduce the effects of stress on your body. So exercise, for example, is it is fundamentally a stressor, but in the long term, it increases your resilience to stress. Another thing you could do is using the physiological sigh. So, this is gaining popularity.
Physiological sigh?
Physiological sigh.
Oh, you mean the breathing out?
The breathing, yeah. And kids do this all the time. If they're throwing a tantrum, they'll be like...
Yeah, I know.
We do it unconsciously, but using that 2 inhales and then a long exhale, then ultimately it's the fastest way to switch off that stress response. Other things you could do include using a sauna. So saunas will also decrease your cortisol response over time as well. Yes, by up to about 20%.
Wow.
Other things...
What about the cold baths?
Cold baths. Well, cold baths are a really good stress inoculation tool. What I mean by that is when you're putting yourself in a stressful situation, but you're challenging yourself and you know that it's a safe situation, then it actually increases your resilience to future stresses. So let's say you have someone who's in the army, then a great way to build up their resilience to future stress is to put them in a stressful situation that they can control, like being in a really cold water bath, right, a cold pool or whatever it might be, and then getting them to calm down and to think and to just maybe go through processes in their head that they need to learn or deal with. And by doing that in a controlled situation, it basically prepares you to deal with future stresses. I think one of the other, and in fact, I probably should have mentioned this first, one of the most powerful things that we can do, other than exercise, is socializing. So when we're socializing with people that we like, then we have a few things happening. And one of those things is the release of oxytocin. So it's even better if you hug the person or you have physical contact is better. Yeah. But that has to be consensual, of course.
Yes.
But what that does is higher levels of oxytocin will have this feedback loop and it will reduce that stress hormone cortisol. So that's why hanging around people that you like you feel better. You feel less stressed. And that's not just a coincidence. That's your body's response to that. And it's lowering those stress hormones.
How does